All right, so this video today, we're going to be going over bank rules in QuickBooks Online, which is personally one of my most used and favorite features in QuickBooks Online. So if you don't know what it essentially is you can set up rules to where when you're going through your bank feed and categorizing transactions to where you tell it for transactions that come through pretty often for certain vendors or customers. And if it looks similar on your bank feed every time, then you can set up these rules to tell QuickBooks Online basically how to categorize those transactions. So not only does it help you save time once you set them up whenever you're categorizing transactions through your bank feed, but it also helps you keep your books more consistent, your financials and your accounting more consistent, because you have a better chance of every time certain transactions come through that are similar of categorizing them the same every time, because you're setting up these rules, versus trying to remember every time you go through and one of those transactions come in to categorize it, just trying to use your memory every time. So it helps you stay more consistent as well. So for those two reasons is why saving time and being more consistent is the reasons why I really like setting these up. So there's no exact way to set these up, but I'm just going to go over what has worked for me personally. For me and my clients, this is the same way I set all my bank rules up basically. And but you can test it out. You can set it up the way I'm going to show you with your particular transactions and see that if it works for you. And if not, hopefully you have a good understanding of how to set these up after this video to kind of customize it yourself to make it work for you. Whenever you're looking at the bank feed here, generally what I like to do whenever I'm categorizing through the bank feed is to duplicate two tabs here. So I'll have one tab open, that's the bank feed itself. And then I'll have a second tab where I'll have this vendors page open. So if you get expenses here in the left and then down to vendors. The reason I like doing that is 99% of the time when I'm going through bank feeds, I like to sort by description. And then so that way it shows it per vendor of what these transactions are coming through or per customer. And then what I like to do is go through, and then for certain vendors, I like to search the history of those vendors in this vendor screen in order to see how I've categorized transactions in the past for this same vendor. And so what I like to do usually is that if I'm going through the bank feed and there's no bank rules set up here for these, so this is what it would look like if there's no rules set up. Usually what I would do is that if I see a few transactions that come through with the same vendor, and then it doesn't have a bank rule applied to it, and then I search under the vendor history and I see that there's a decent amount of transactions that have been categorized using this vendor in the past, then at that point usually is when I like to open up a third tab and then create a bank rule for that. Because if you have a few transactions and you know that you're going to be consistently paying this certain vendor, then it's probably worth at that point to set up a bank rule. And so I would open up a third tab here, and then to get to the bank rule screen, under banking here in the left column, you go under there and then rules. So now we have three tabs open. We have the bank feed, we have the vendors, and again, this is to search how we've categorized transactions in the past under these certain vendors. And then we have this rules tab open as well. So if you look through, we're going to do the vendor pilot travel center for this example. So here we're looking at our bank feed and we see all these transactions for pilot travel center. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a bank rule. I don't think I have a history for this particular account for pilot, but we do. Okay. So we look up the history. Okay, so there's no actual transactions in here, but let's say that there were vehicle expenses for gas as the history of these transactions under this vendor. So we'd look up, see a history here for gas. And then, so what we would do now is go to this bank rules page here. And then the top right here, we can hit new rule. Let me describe first in these sections here of what we're actually doing. So the first section, of course, is just naming the rule. That's pretty straightforward. But then we have this box in this section right here. And what you're doing in this section is basically telling QuickBooks Online when to queue this rule. So you're giving different characteristics here, and then like description, bank text, things like that. And we're going to get into that here in a second. But you're giving certain descriptions here and characteristics in order to tell QuickBooks to queue the rule. And then in the second section here, once you tell it it, as in QuickBooks Online, when to queue the rule, then in this section, you tell it how to apply the rule. So basically how to categorize this transaction. So just to get an understanding, here's you're telling it when to queue the rule. Here you're telling it once it's queued what to do with that transaction. So here we're just going to name it, let's just name it pilot. You can name it whatever you want. And then in this section, so again, here we're telling it when to queue the rule. So you can choose it whether it's money coming out or money coming in. So money out usually means, in this particular case, for paying a vendor. So we're paying pilot, so that's money out. We're going to go over after this of money in, of bank deposits and customer deposits. But let's keep this at money out. And then if you have money out here, and then you can choose here whether it's all bank or credit card accounts, or if you want to only it apply to certain bank or credit card accounts. 95% of the time, I keep this checked as all bank accounts. And it just makes it easier because if you usually pay with a credit card, but then you happen to use your debit card for a certain vendor, it still queues the rule. So that's why I like just keeping it at all bank accounts. However, there are a few instances to where I do uncheck this and only make the rule apply for certain bank accounts. Mainly is that, so I have a few clients that track by location, and they also have different bank accounts for that location. So what I would do in that case is I would make rules and only choose the one bank account for that location. And then whenever you set up here how to categorize it, then you categorize it by that certain location. So if that applies to you, you understand hopefully what I mean here. But for most of you, I'm guessing you can probably just keep this checked as all bank and credit card accounts. So now at this point, we have this section here to where you can choose between description, bank text, and amount. So what that means, if we jump back to the bank feed here, so we have the description, which is this section right here. It's basically the description looking at the bank feed. So in this particular case, the description is Pilot Travel Center. That's the description that QuickBooks pulls up for these transactions in your bank feed. The next characteristic we can choose here is bank text, and that's the actual text that shows up on your bank statement or your credit card statement. And in this case, well, in all cases, it's under this bank detail here. So this pilot and then all these numbers here, that's the bank text. And if you go through, you see another one, pilot, these numbers here, that's your bank text. And then the third characteristic is the amount. That's basically the dollar amount of money coming in or out. And so we can add conditions and we can take away conditions. And then once we start adding more than one, so we have this all or any. So what that essentially means is that if you want to queue the rule, so let's say you have a few characteristics here, just different descriptions, bank text, and dollar amounts. You can tell it to either queue this rule if all of these characteristics apply or if any of them do. So if any one of these characteristics queues the rule, then you can make it queue the rule, or you can set it to where the only way it queues the rule if all of these are as what they should be. So for the majority of what I do when I'm setting up these bank rules is I add a condition and I make one description and I make one bank text and then I change this to any. That's just what I found works for me for the majority of these bank rules. Usually when I hit all, it doesn't always queue the rule because, one of these could be off for a variety of reasons because it doesn't always look the same whenever you're paying the same vendor. Every once in a while, bank details will change, descriptions will change. It's just the nature of how it works with the bank and credit card. So they're not always, but if you add a description and a bank text and hit any, then you just improve your chances of it still, even if a change is made in one of them, of it still approving the rule or queuing the rule. And then you also have the condition here of the dollar amount, and you can make it equals, greater than, or less than, or doesn't equal, and then put in the dollar amount. And you can make a few of these. So you can make it greater than something and less than something. I very rarely use this. Sometimes when I do use it is that if I have transactions to the same vendor that are different based on different dollar amounts, it's kind of hard to explain, but I have some softwares and things to where, with some of my clients, to where they pay the same software or vendor a certain dollar amount, and when it's that amount, I know it's this category. And then whenever they pay them for a different dollar amount, I know it's a different category. So in that case, I'll set up 2 different rules and I'll put this amount in here. And then pretty much always, if you do add any amount in here, then I would change this to all. Because if you add bank text and description and an amount here, and then you change it to any, sometimes it'll queue in your bank feed because you're just telling it if any of these transactions hit. So let's say you make it greater than $100, then sometimes what it'll do is when you look at your bank feed, it'll queue all transactions in there that are over $100 for this rule because you have an any in amount, and you don't want that. So that's an important note here, is that if you do the amount, I would say pretty much all the time, change this to all. But again, normally what I do is I make it any, and then description and bank text is just what works for me. Again, there's no set thing here of how to work this. So what I would do is set this any, description, bank text. Then if you go back to the bank feed, so again, this is a description here. So I usually just copy and paste this description. And then we have the bank text. And so again, there's no set rule here. You have to play with it and see what works in your particular cases. So the game you kind of have to play here is that you want enough information that it only queues the rule for these transactions. If you make it too vague, it can sometimes queue these rules for transactions that don't apply. But you don't want so much information in here that it doesn't ever really usually queue the rule. And what I mean by that, so these pilot transactions, for example, when you're looking at the bank details, so it has pilot, and then it has these numbers here. Pilot, and then these numbers. Pilot, and these numbers. So what I've done is I've gone to a lot of pilot travel centers and got gas at different locations. So what I'm guessing this is that pilot has different store numbers, and that's most likely what I would guess is what these are. So we don't want to add these numbers in there in case we go to different pilots. We still want it to be gas. So these numbers are going to change all the time. So in this particular case, what I would do is I would just make pilot. And I'm just hitting Command copy here as a shortcut to copy this, but I would make just pilot the bank detail, and I would not include any of these numbers. So we're going to add that as the bank text. So now what we're saying is that if any transaction comes into our bank feed where money's coming out, so we're paying somebody, and the description says pilot travel center or the bank text says pilot, then it's going to queue this rule. That's what we're telling QuickBooks right now in this top section. And then now what we're going to do, and again, we can test this rule here. So if you hit test rule, it'll tell you if this rule queues any transactions that are unreviewed in your bank feed. So that's a great way to test this to make sure that your description here is correct. And now we're going to go down here to this second section. So now we told it when to queue the rule. Now we're going to tell it how to categorize the transaction once the rule is queued. So we have this first section here. So we have expense, transfer, check, credit card payment. I believe this is pretty self-explanatory. So for this case, we're going to make an expense. This is the category of the expense in your chart of accounts. So again, we're going to make this vehicle expenses and gas. And you can add a split here if you want. And then the payee. So in this case, it's going to be pilot. And then in this section, if you track by customer, project, if you have tags, if you track by location or classes, here in this bottom section is where you can add as many of these as you need. Now, a lot of the time in this bottom section, this will automatically be checked as auto add. So it says automatically confirm transactions this rule applies to. I always, 100% of the time, I always uncheck this. This is up to you. It depends on how many transactions you're dealing with, how confident you are in this rule. However, either way, I always uncheck this. So what this is saying, so first let me save this and refresh your bank feed so you'll see what this looks like unchecked in your bank feed. So let's save this. Let's refresh our bank feed here. So now the rule is created for a pilot. So we're going to go back into our bank feed here. And now this is what your bank feed will look like when a rule is applied. So now we see all these pilot travel centers here. And then we see now that there's a payee, a pilot travel center, and then we see this rule is applied that we just created to make it vehicle expenses and gas. What we can do at this point if you want, so we can go through individually and see like it's already categorized how we want it, so we can hit add. Or if there's a bunch of transactions, we can hit one, go down to where it ends, hold in shift, and then hit, and then we can select all of them, and then you can hit accept, and that'll accept them all through. So what that did is cleared them for the bank feed and categorized those transactions in the bank feed to vehicle expenses and gas. Now, if you have that auto add check that we were just talking about in the bank rules page, then what it'll do is that whenever the pilot expense comes in through your credit card or bank account, it will never even hit your bank feed. It'll automatically cue the rule and then apply it, basically approve it like how we just did, automatically for you. So you'll never have to see it in your bank feed. You'll never have to approve it. To me though, in my opinion, it doesn't take very long at all to select them all, just like I showed you, and hit approve. And I like doing that because it still gives you an opportunity to view it in your bank feed to make sure that the rule is being applied to the transactions that it should be applied to. Because if you don't do that, it can be automatically, adding these through, but you never really see them. It never hits your bank feed. And to me, it's not worth the extra couple seconds saved to not get an eye on them a little bit and approve them yourself. So it's up to you. You can have auto add as you want, but again, me personally, I usually like to uncheck that box and not have it an auto add. Another point that brings up, a lot of the times you probably notice already that whenever you're going through and you're categorizing normally through your bank feed, it'll cue something saying, do you want us to add a bank rule for this? Again, I always hit no for that. And I like to create the rule on our own like we're doing here, because if you hit yes there, then QuickBooks does just create the rule automatically, but you don't know what characteristics and everything it's really applying to. And a lot of the time it's a little bit too specific for it to cue the rule as we want. So I usually don't do that either. So that's generally really the basics of the bank rules here. So another thing to consider as well is that, so we just went over an expense in this example. We can also do it for money coming in. So if you hit money in here into bank accounts, so this depends completely on your current workflow, but you can put money in for deposits. So if you do cash deposits a lot, you can categorize it that way. If you're categorizing deposits as sales, you can make it a deposit and then choose your income account that's associated with it, the sales account. You can also we as my firm, we specialize in the external POS systems and the daily clearing account sales setup. So we use bank rules exclusively for that all the time. And so we have clearing accounts, like a Shopify clearing account, Stripe clearing account, things like that. So we'll set everything up as it is, and then what we'll do is we'll create a bank rule for money coming in for Shopify or Stripe, whatever it is, PayPal. And then usually what we do is we set it up as a transfer coming out of those clearing accounts. And so you can do that as well with these bank rules. So you have the clearing accounts for, again, Shopify, Stripe, whatever it is. So you can do the same thing with money coming in to transfer out those clearing accounts. So that's really the basics of the bank rules. Again, I use them all the time. I think it's always it's a little bit, extra work up front creating all these and testing them out, but over the long run, it does save you time. But I think even more importantly, it helps you be more consistent with how you're categorizing these transactions. You don't have to always try to remember how to categorize certain vendors. It just cues the rule for you, and all you have to do is just basically approve the rules. So it saves you time, but it also helps you be way more consistent and accurate in your bookkeeping and accounting. I think the main thing is that, to me, I would say to uncheck this auto add, and at least for the first few months when you're creating these rules, to really verify when it's hitting your bank feed that it's acting as it should. And if it's not, then you can always go back into your bank rules screen, which is under banking here, and then rules. Search for the name, find the rule, hit edit, and then look at this section right here. Look at the characteristics that you applied here to see when it should cue the rule. Look at where the mistake is, if there is a mistake in your bank feed, and then make corrections from there. You may need to play around with these sometimes to make this work for you. All right, so I want to thank you for watching my video or my videos. If this isn't my first video that you're watching. And I wanted to give a quick update. So one of my big goals for this upcoming year is to grow my email newsletter list. And the reason for that is because I always want to be able to provide you guys with free training content, such as this video, for example. And I don't always want to rely on social media algorithms such as YouTube. So having this email list, I have in a direct communication with you in order to always be able to provide, no matter what happens in the social media realm, I'll always be able to provide directly to you these kind of resources. And if you are interested, so here's the link up here. So it's essentially -intentional.com/newsletter. And of course, it'll be linked in the description. And I do apologize if you have trouble reading this. If you do, you can go to this link and it's written out on a web page of all the details of what this is. What I ask of you to give is your first name and your email address. And if you do that, then what you'll initially receive whenever you sign up is I have a 1-hour QuickBooks Online training webinar session that I did. So for my local Chamber of Commerce here. And then also too, I have a business foundation PDF, I call it. And so I got a lot of requests for people who are initially starting up their own small business, so kind of what they need to do from a legal and kind of accounting standpoint to get everything set up, such as opening up an EIN, using that EIN to open up a separate business bank account, setting up your bookkeeping and accounting software, things like that. And I know most of you probably already have your own small business set up, but it could still be beneficial because you can use this as a guide to make sure that that foundation is there. And if it's not, then you can start setting it up at any point, really. And then also too, so the daily sales checklist. So one of my most popular videos is the daily sales entry method of using clearing accounts in QuickBooks Online to enter sales. And so I have a checklist of the accounts for that, so you'll receive that as well if that would be beneficial for you. And then ongoing, so my plan is to send just one email a month at the end of every month. What those emails will include is, most importantly, so these type of videos that I'm already creating on YouTube, I'll be linking those and sending those directly to your email. So again, we don't always have to rely on social media algorithms. And for the time being, these videos will include, of course, QuickBooks Online training videos, but also too, I'm going to start introducing more of small business and entrepreneur management accounting type videos. So talking about creating goals for your business and creating monthly budgets in order to align with those goals, and so things like that. So, and also too, links, resources, and updates to anything in the small business accounting and finance world, just to keep up to date on what the changes in the industry and how those affect small business owners on a day-to-day basis. So I'll also be including those. And then finally, last, I'll be including some travel and adventure updates on my own personal front in these emails. And so the reason for that, one of them is to keep me accountable so I don't get too comfortable, because I believe one of the big things that's important for small business owners is to have a why and a reason as to why you have your small business in the first place, in terms of how to support you and your own goals. So of course, you know, a big part of your small business is helping others in a certain ways, but I also believe it's important to have a vision of how your business is going to support you on a personal front. And I know this isn't everyone's goal, but my hope is that if I send these updates on these goals, so like one of them, for example, is to travel to all 50 states. Depending on when you're watching this video, so right now I'm at state 45 out of 50, and then I'm flying to Hawaii in 2 weeks, and that'll be state number 46. And my hope is by the end of this year, I'll be able to go to all 50 states. So that'll be one of the updates, for example, per month, is what state I'm at, what number, and what my plans are and where I've been. And I know that that's not everyone's goals, or that's not even what everyone's interested in, is travel and adventure. But I just wanted to hopefully maybe give some inspiration, and at the very least give some reminders on a monthly basis to have your business support you and your personal goals. Because even if your goal is to spend more time with your kids, more time with your family, or just more leisure time, because I know from experience and from myself and from working for a lot of small business owners, is they initially have this personal goal where they want to have their business support them personally, and then they get so caught up in the day-to-day and the growth and everything of their business that they forget to actually make time in order to do these type of things for your personal life. So my hope is, again, maybe some inspiration, hold myself accountable, but also to remind you again on a monthly basis to take some time to think about why you're creating your business and growing your business and how it's going to support you in your own personal or family life. Again, I really thank you guys for watching, and if you are interested in this, again, here's the link here and I'll provide it down below. Thanks again.